So, the reason I gave you guys that quiz is in a way to prompt you or to sort of prime you to think in utilitarian terms, right? I think most people are going to say, in the ventilator case, let's give it to the younger person. Why? Well, it's a fictional pandemic. Goodness only knows what it's supposed to do. But in most real world cases, a younger person will be much more likely to survive. You know, People are going on a ventilator. The odds are often against them anyway, but of the two, the younger person almost certainly has better chances. Beyond that, even if the odds were equal, the one guy I think in my fictional case is 25, the other guy is 70, the younger guy is going to have much longer to live, right? Even if there wasn't this fact that his prognosis is probably better. He has better odds of surviving if he gets the treatment. There's the fact that, if you save him, you get more years of life, right? Let me give you guys another case. The Skylab case I gave you. Actually, the actual Skylab case was a lot more complicated than my little example. My example was kind of inspired by it. But most of you will say, fire the thrusters, keep the space station up in the air. And why will you say that? Better consequences, right? If it comes down over Southern California, fiery bits of space station coming down from the sky, well, if it's coming down over LA and or San Diego or any of the many little suburbs in between them, hugely dense urban area, right? If it's coming down there, people are very, very likely to be injured. If it's falling down over the Australian outback, well, it's possible, but as I said in the question, it's one of the most sparsely populated places on Earth. It's really unlikely anybody's going to be hurt, and if they are, it's probably only going to be a few people, right? In the real world, it was more complicated. NASA did fire the thrusters. They kind of miscalculated. They thought that it would come down over somewhere that wasn't populated at all. It came down over Australia. Nobody was hurt. Some Australians were a little annoyed, and one Australian county, or however Australia organizes its areas, I forget how, they did actually fine NASA $400 for littering, which I think is hilarious. That takes a little bit of cheek, but good for them. Good for the Australians. All right. Anyway, so let's move on though, because that's just to introduce the basic idea here. And the basic idea is consequentialism. And consequentialism is the idea that consequences determine what is morally right or wrong. When you want to know what the right thing to do is, you think about the consequences of the actions that are open to you. If it has good consequences, it's a good thing to do. If it has bad consequences, it's not, right? And the thing I want you guys to realize, the reason I gave you these cases, is that this is a natural way of thinking about actions, right? I didn't have to give you, some people are going to have different answers, but most people will answer those two cases, the ventilator and the space station case, purely as consequentialists, right? What are the consequences of each possible action? All right. Now, the problem with consequentialism is that it's often hard to know exactly what are and aren't good consequences, right? In that case, it's pretty clear, in the space station case and the ventilator case, but we need a more precise account. And one way of giving a more precise account is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism. It's not the only one, but it is by far the most important and the most well-known. There are other weird forms of consequentialism out there. You'll see them, some philosophers will try to make careers out of defending some weird flavor of consequentialism, most of them never get too far off the ground. Utilitarianism, you know, don't just treat the two terms interchangeably, because there are forms of consequentialism that aren't utilitarianism, but for the most part, most consequentialists are utilitarians, and it really is the most important form of consequentialism. Okay. So what is utilitarianism? There are two parts to utilitarian theory. These can come apart. You might believe one or the other of these, and if you did, you wouldn't be a utilitarian. To be a utilitarian, you need to subscribe to both of these. First of these is hedonism. The second is impartiality. Well, you guys might have some ideas about what hedonism means. It actually means something more complicated and far more boring for utilitarians than you're probably thinking of. It doesn't mean wild times and partying, or if you've ever seen Futurama, there's hedonism bot. Doesn't mean what he thinks it means. We'll talk about what it means in a second. Also, impartiality. We will also talk about what that means. So I think we can understand both of these aspects of utilitarianism by seeing them as answers to two questions. The first answers the first question, the second answers the second. What is good? What makes someone's life go well? That's the first question, the first type of question. The second is whose good should you care about? Another way of putting question one, what is in someone's interest, right? We've already seen this with Plato. We might think we know what's in our interest. It's not always clear. The utilitarian is going to give us a more precise account. All right. So question one, what is good? What makes someone's life go well? Let's look at these 2 points, these 2 parts of utilitarianism in turn, and spend a little time on each of them. The first part is they will say what makes someone's life go well is happiness. Okay, fine, good. But, we want to dig a little deeper, right? What does happiness mean? You need to give me some kind of account of happiness, or you haven't said a lot. And one thing I want you guys to keep in mind when we get to virtue theory, Aristotle at the end of the semester, he will also talk about happiness, but he has something really different in mind, right? Sometimes people use the same word, but they might mean very different things. That is going to be something you're going to see is happening here. All right, but for the time being, let's just talk about what the utilitarian means. For the utilitarian, happiness equals pleasure and the absence of pain. Happiness is nothing more than pleasure and not having pain. And you want to be clear, if you're a utilitarian, they are very inclusive in what they count for both of these. Pleasure is, yes, physical pleasure, eating, sex, things like that, all that sort of stuff that hedonism bot would recognize. So if you guys haven't seen Futurama, it's actually a pretty fun joke. If you have, you'll get it. But pleasure is also anything that you find enjoyable or somebody else does. If you enjoy doing math problems, some people do. I talked to a friend who's said one of his hobbies is recreational mathematics, right? If you enjoy solving math problems, that is pleasure. If you enjoy listening to some kind of music, that is pleasure. Anything that you enjoy counts as pleasure for the utilitarian. And anything that you dislike is pain, right? If you twist your ankle, if you have a headache, yes, of course, that's pain. But if you're bored out of your mind, that's also pain. If you're angry, that's also pain. If you're Sad, that's pain. Pleasure is any sensation that you like. Pain is any sensation you dislike. Basic physical stuff counts for both, but also higher order stuff like pleasures people take in intellectual puzzles or listening to music, and negative emotions, right? All right. So now let's think about this, right? This is supposed to be an answer to this question: what is good? What makes someone's life go well, right? And now you might think of, imagine the utilitarian telling us this. You might think of some figure like Socrates, asking them questions. Like I said, that's a good practice for any time you read philosophy. And they might ask the certain thing. It's like, well, what about pleasurable things that are bad for you, right? Someone does heroin, right? I've never done heroin. I am told that it's very, very pleasurable, right? Get a lot of pleasure from heroin. Something I have done is eat ice cream for breakfast. I don't do it every day. Goodness help. But, in each of these cases, you get a lot of pleasure. But is it a good answer to your life's going well? If you do heroin or you eat ice cream every day, your life is probably not going well, right? Well, our utilitarian friend says happiness is pleasure in the absence of pain. Aren't they stuck saying the silly thing that the heroin addict or the guy who eats ice cream for breakfast every day, his life is going really well? Or what about painful things? Going to the dentist, exercises that you don't like, right? I've gotten old. I used to like some form of exercises. I like running, but got old. I hurt my ankle and had to go to physical therapy. And, they bunch of like foot exercises. They're all boring and kind of painful, right? Don't want to do them. Wouldn't the utilitarian say that it would be bad for me to do it? Well, that would be silly as well, right? Why would the utilitarian say I should do my exercises, go to the dentist, and not do heroin or eat ice cream every day, right? How do they avoid this silly answer? Well, they avoid the silly answer by saying we're talking about pleasure and pain in the long run. If someone does heroin, they might get a lot of pleasure now, but in the long run, it's going to bring them a lot of pain that will more than outweigh the pleasure in most cases, right? Ice cream for breakfast every day might not be quite as, bad, but you're going to have bad health effects. That's going to cause you a lot of pain, right? Going to the dentist, not fun now, but if you don't do it, you're going to get a lot more pain in the future. So pleasure and pain in the long run, and the utilitarian will say once you factor that in, you see that this is not a silly answer to this question. So now we have the first part of the utilitarian theory on the table, hedonism. Next lecture, we'll talk about impartiality and say a bit about how utilitarianism, how the whole theory is supposed to work.